Welcome to the Division III May webinar. This will include updates from our April SAAC meeting, our Management Council meeting, as well as our President's Council meetings as well. I'm Allie Spungen, Associate Director of Division III, and I will be joined later by Louise McCleary, Interim VP for Division III. So thank you for joining us today. And on our agenda, we will be talking about Student Athlete Committee updates, which include mental health social media campaign, working group updates, and also our Management Council and President Council updates. And then we will save time, hopefully at the end, for some Q&A. So to dive in to our mental health social media campaign. It is this week. It started yesterday and it will run through Thursday. You can follow the conversation at D3SAC on Twitter or at NCAA D3. The theme this year is Don't Sleep on Stigmas. And it's not too late to join the conversation. So this year is the second annual campaign, which was designed to reduce the stigma associated with speaking out about mental health issues throughout college sports. This year's campaign will center around the Don't Sleep on Stigmas hashtag to encourage discussion within Division III on the current mental health struggles of our student athletes. Some ideas to engage in this week's campaign is to create tweets or social media posts, share quotes, testimonials, videos from your own campus that are related to mental health. If you follow our D3SAC on Twitter, they put a great video together that includes them splashing each other with water to wake themselves up and not sleep on the stigma. And then you can also create team, institutional, or conference PSAs and post those on your social media outlets. For more details about those engagements, you can check out the campaign webpage, and under the Engagement Ideas tab, you'll find other ways to get involved. Also on the campaign webpage is Resources tab that can find valuable mental health educational resources from our very own NCAA Sports Science Institute, as well as some other great organizations. After the campaign is over, on Thursday, May 6th, there are still ways to keep the efforts going. One example is to download the mental health resource template card that can be found on the D3SAC webpage. And also on Thursday, follow D3SAC's pledge and repost why you, your institution, your team, or conference won't sleep on the stigma. SAC encourages everyone to tag teammates or colleagues to share why they won't either. Just an update from our April SAC meeting. Our D3SAC, they are been busy meeting their goals for the 2021 year and their priorities that they set. And we have 3 working groups this year. The first is the Mental and Physical Health Working Group that has been preparing the second annual Mental Health and Social Media campaign I just highlighted. And today at 2 p.m., immediately following this webinar, they will host a live or a Twitter live event with Molly McQuarrie, a mental performance coach from T3 Performance. She will talk about her day-to-day experience as a mental performance coach, how she helps student athletes, and ways student athletes can seek help from people like her. So please tune in if you have time today or follow along on Twitter. Next up is our Social Justice and Inclusion Working Group. They recap their Black History Month Twitter campaign, which featured profiles highlighting the voices of Division III student athletes and what the month meant to them. The group is planning to build highlights and engagement opportunities to support Pride Month as well. So they'll be looking forward to more stories about LGBTQ student athletes. And lastly, the group continues to discuss potential to organize a summit for student athletes in collaboration with the NCAA on the topic of racial justice on campus, so stay tuned. And last, but definitely not least, the Special Olympics Working Group developed a Planning a Division III Special Olympics virtual event resource guide to help campuses and conferences be creative and start planning virtual events. So even with COVID, you can still be an active Special Olympics supporter. So SAC encourages all of Division III to get creative and help support the inclusion revolution. That document can be found on the D3SAC webpage. And just a friendly reminder to please report your Division III Special Olympics events. And finally, an overarching goal of Division III SAC was to increase the student athlete voice. And if you've been following along, they have been doing that this year. They have been at the forefront of all of our discussions in our division this year, giving vital feedback. They have presented during these webinars and also helped establish the United as One campaign. I encourage you all to stay tuned to see what other great ideas and initiatives in the future that D3 SAAC has in store. So stay tuned. Next, moving forward to our campus sexual violence policy. As you know, in April 2020, the NCAA Board of Governors expanded the association-wide policy on campus sexual violence to include individual accountability measures. This action is an opportunity for member schools to evaluate their prevention measures based on their campus policies and state and federal laws. Additionally, the U.S. Department of Education released new Title IX regulations that became effective in August 2020. These new regulations raised several questions for the membership regarding how the association's expanded policy intersects with the new requirements of the DOE regulations. To serve the membership in fulfilling this annual policy requirement amidst COVID challenges and given the new DOE regulations, the Board of Governors directed the development of a membership task force to provide resources to assist members in developing implementation measures on campus. The task force includes members from all three divisions and shall work to develop operational guidelines, best practices, and supporting documentation that campuses can use to implement the expanded policy. The task force has submitted its recommendations to the BOG and will release the resources to the membership by this summer. Member schools will be able to use the resources to better prepare for the 2022-23 attestation requirements. Institutions are still required to attest by the deadline of this May 15th, as well as May 2022 prior to the expanded policy taking effect with the May 2023 attestation. And as a reminder, this year's Division III education session for the NCAA convention was on campus sexual violence policy and is available on ncaa.org and shares more information about the policy and educational best practices. That's all I have to cover for today's webinar. So I am going to send the virtual mic over to Louise.
Thanks, Allie. And let's now turn to key discussions that occurred during the April Management and President's Council meetings. And as you can see on the slide, I'm going to start with name, image, and likeness. I think most of you know at this point that President's Council withdrew the NIL proposal at the 2021 NCAA convention. And the reason why is the association had received a letter from the Department of Justice, the Antitrust Division, saying that there were concerns with all three divisions' NIL legislative proposal. However, if you were involved with convention at all, at the same time you heard both management and President's Council say that they were committed to providing name, image, and likeness opportunities to Division III student athletes as soon as possible. So the reason why we're bringing this before you today and why we discussed it with the President's Council is that we believe that that time is going to be occurring this June. And also, if you remember, there were lots of webinars and conversations leading up to the convention in 2021. And really what we found is that the membership had strong support for the Division III NIL legislative proposal. So as I mentioned, we think there's going to be an opportunity to adopt the name, image, and likeness proposal this June. We do not anticipate any significant changes to it. And so what we did at President's Council meeting last week is we talked about it and we said, is there still support moving forward, understanding that with our current governance structure, more than likely our administrative committee will be the one that will need to act in between the cycles. And so in between the meeting cycles, our President's Council endorsed that. And so letting all of you know that we anticipate some type of action sometime during the month of June. We'll make sure to communicate to the membership exactly what's happening. And if you may be asking why can't we wait until the July Management Council meeting and the August President's Council meeting, is that we're hoping to have an effective date of July 1 or immediate if we end up acting after July 1. And the reason why is, if you've been following the news, you know several states have introduced NIL legislation, and even some states have legislation that will start effective July 1. And so we want to make sure that our NIL legislation has been acted on and is ready to go as soon as possible for our student athletes. The last thing I'm going to mention in this space is that many of our Division III presidents and chancellors have been reaching out to members of Congress, because with all that activity at the state level, it is critical for us to have federal bipartisan legislation. And it's important, and our Division III presidents and chancellors have stepped up. They have reached out to make sure members of Congress understand that Division III and Division II and Division I all make up the association, and we all are unique, and they're unique challenges, and we need to make sure that that federal legislation aligns as much as possible with the legislation that we're hoping to pass in the coming months. So with the Division III budget, we've received a lot of questions around this, and I think the most important thing that everybody knows is we did have a successful Division I men's basketball championship that concluded in early April. The reason that's important is that then triggers for us to get our constitutionally guaranteed revenue. This year, because we capped ticket sales at 25% capacity, what that means is we're anticipating our revenue being about 10% less, for a total of $30 million. So what we've done, as we had the impact of the pandemic last year and into this year, is that for our non-championship budget, all of our programs, we either delayed them, we canceled them, or we moved them to a virtual format. So for non-championships, the spend we have this year is primarily in two places: our conference grant program that impacts all 450 plus Division III members, as well as our Division III diversity grants that we just recently put the 39 recipients in the May monthly update. With championships, most of you are well aware, we ended up canceling our fall championships. We canceled our winter championships. I'm happy to say our spring championships are up and running. We crowned a national champion in men's volleyball not too long ago. And so what we know is that we will have some money left over this year due to the non-championship budget changes, the championship cancellations. And I've heard several questions of, will we lose that money? No, we always retain that money. It will go into our mandated reserve. And if you remember, about a year ago when the pandemic hit, Strategic Planning and Finance and the councils approved some cuts to our supplemental spend. That's spend above and beyond our base operating budget. And what's important to know there is, yes, while we'll have some funds left over this year, both the councils and Strategic Planning and Finance said, let's wait one more year. Let's see what next year brings. We don't know, will there be continued the need for predetermined sites for championships, continued testing needs? Will travel inflation go back up again? So once we have those knowns, there's a good chance that if things continue to remain stable, we might be able to bring back that supplemental spend sooner than anticipated. The other thing I'll say about our budget, we are currently in a budget planning year, so both councils received an update on that. We are going to have our new budget will start September 1, 2021, and it will actually run for 3 years. Typically, we have a 2-year budget cycle. We're going to have a 3-year budget cycle, and the reason why is our CBS Turner broadcast agreement, the current one, ends in 23-24. And what we know about that is the revenue is relatively flat the last 2 years. So we thought the best way to move forward to keep us financially strong was to have a 3-year budget. Then we know in 24-25, we start a new CBS Turner contract. The net revenue actually increases by quite a bit that first year. And that's the time, if we haven't already brought back our supplemental spend, we'll definitely be able to bring it back. The other thing Strategic Planning and Finance and the councils approved, again, a couple meetings ago, is that as we move forward, starting in 2024-25, they made a change to our mandated reserve policy. Right now, our current policy is 50% of the annual revenue. They've made that change to say, instead of doing it that way, let's have a flat $15 million that will make up our mandated reserve. We learned a lot from the pandemic. We learned that if we have that type of mandated, that type of money in our mandated reserve plus an insurance policy, it will allow us to cover if we have another catastrophic event to the division. The strategic positioning platform, if you've been on campus for a while, you may say, oh, I remember that. You may not look at it very often. It's a decade old, but what we wanted to do is update it. And the reason why is it is a document that provides in a concise, clear way, consistent language that really describes the uniqueness of Division III. And so the timing is now because a few months ago, the association released their updated strategic priorities. And so Strategic Planning and Finance, the council said, well, if the association's updated their strategic priorities, let's look at our own strategic positioning platform. So we created a working group of SPFC, our Strategic Planning and Finance Committee. They've met twice. They're going to meet again next week. And what they did is they sent their first round edits and recommendations to the councils to review during their April meetings. Both councils spent a good amount of time providing feedback on the changes, endorsed the direction that this working group is moving. And so the next time the councils see the strategic positioning platform, it will be during the summer meetings. And during those summer meetings, they'll see it in final format. We anticipate that they will approve it since they've endorsed it. They'll be able to approve that final, and then we'll release it to the membership. And again, we believe both the council, strategic planning and finance, staff, that this updated document will be able to use language that talks about the uniqueness of Division III today. And there's value in that as you're working with prospective student athletes and their parents, but there's also value on your campus as you're working with faculty, alumni, trustees. And so we're pretty excited to get this resource out to you and to make sure that we provide you some key ways that you can use it both externally and internally on your campus. And this is something that's relatively new, so some of you may have heard of it, others may not. But every year, the Sports Science Institute for the past 3 or 4 years has held an annual NCAA football concussion task force meeting. We have Division III representatives that have gone to the task force meeting. And what comes out of this task force meeting are the recent trends on head impact exposures and concussions. The meeting was held in early February, and what we heard coming out of that meeting is that based on the recent data and the trends, that there has been a higher level of head impact exposures during the preseason and the regular season versus compared to actual games. And so the Sports Science Institute asked all 3 divisions to look at the trends and to figure out ways that we can maybe mitigate those trends. And so similar to our colleagues in Division I and Division II, we put together a working group. It consists of all the members of the Division III Football Committee, a representative from our Interpretations and Legislation Committee, and a representative from our Management Council. They've had 2 meetings. During those 2 meetings, they received an update from Dr. Brian Hainline, our Chief Medical Officer, on the recent data trends. They created a survey, and they sent the survey out to all head football coaches. And the idea of the survey was to gather feedback on practice habits in the preseason and in the regular season. The good news is we had 92% of our head coaches complete the survey, so we got some tremendous information from them. One of the things that we have heard out of that association-wide task force is what is directly linked to the higher head impact exposure is a term called straight line contact drills. And there has been conversation with our Division III working group as well as with the Division II and Division I working groups. What would be the impact if we prohibited those straight line contact drills? I think the good news is our survey showed only 24% of our head coaches use those type of drills in the preseason, and it drops all the way to 10% in the regular season. Our working group, with one of their discussions, one of their meetings, said that they did not believe that there would be a significant impact on the August or on the 2021 football season, that some starts in August, other in September, if the association came out with a policy prohibiting straight line contact drills. Doesn't mean it's done, but I do want to be able to give sort of that preview possibly. What our working group said was the most important thing, and again, which all three divisions are considering, is education. Education about the data trends, education about why some drills are better than other drills. And all three divisions are looking at requiring on an annual basis that head coaches and others have to watch some type of educational video via the NCAA learning management system. As I mentioned, we've had 2 meetings with the working group. Our 3rd meeting is scheduled for later this May. At that point, if there are any recommendations to be made, they will make it to the appropriate committee so it can go through our governance structure. It is not our intent to have any changes happen in preparation for the 2021 season. However, as I mentioned, the straight line contact drills, prohibiting those, mandatory education may be 2 things that may occur before we start the 2021 football season. So we'll continue to keep the membership updated on this particular topic and the next steps that come out of it. Again, transgender student athlete participation. I've given this update to our commissioners, to a few other groups. If we turn the clock back to last October, several of our association-wide committees started to look at the NCAA's transgender policy today. It's 10 years old. And so the idea behind it was maybe we need to have the Committee on Women's Athletics, the Minority Opportunities Interest Committee, competitive safeguards, look at that and see ways that we need to update it. At the same time, the Office of Inclusion partnered with the Sports Science Institute to make sure to say, let's have a gender equity summit. Participants included medical experts, transgender student athletes, and really what they wanted to do is to say, as we continue to have our policy, how do we make sure it provides fair, inclusive, dignified participation? How do we make sure it ensures competitive equity for all student athletes? And how is it supported by both evidence and consensus-based research? That work is almost done. We anticipate that a recommendation regarding our transgender policy will be presented to the Board of Governors either during their summer meeting that happens in early August or their October meeting. Meanwhile, though, while all of this has been going on, more and more states have put forward bills that prohibit transgender student athlete participation. 4 states have already enacted laws. Those laws do not go into effect until July 1. And so while the Board of Governors put out their statement a few weeks ago that said that they support transgender student athlete participation in college sports and that all of our events, championships, other events need to be in an environment that is free of discrimination, it's not impacting our current spring championships because the bills don't go into effect until July 1. But we anticipate that this will be back in front of the Board of Governors in August as they figure out how championships and events will unfold and where they'll be held in 2021-22. I think all of you have heard also that during the Division I men's and women's basketball championship, there were some concerns around gender equity. I wanted to provide the update that the Board of Governors said we're going to have a comprehensive review of all of our championships. As you can see on the slide, we've hired an outside consultant who's never worked with the NCAA, Kaplan, Hecker, and Fink. They are conducting interviews, talking to different groups, collecting feedback, and currently their focus is solely on Division I men's and women's basketball. They anticipate providing recommendations to Division I to insert into their governance structure of how to move forward this summer. However, they have said that once that review is done, they are turning their attention to the other 88 championships, which include all of our Division III championships, and they anticipate that review being done by the end of the summer, worst case early fall. Once that report is done, it will be shared with our councils, it will be shared with the membership, and then as the recommendations come through our division, our President's Council, our Management Council will figure out the best way to incorporate those recommendations. I'm going to turn to academic and membership affairs, but I think many in our membership was looking to see if our President's Council would approve the enrollment flexibility waiver that came forward from Management Council. It was approved. There are certain conditions. There's a link right here in this PowerPoint. We put it into the COVID communication, but also know that our AMA colleagues are working on an FAQ that they anticipate releasing this week, and that would be right on the Division III compliance page. We also fully understand that this blanket waiver does not cover every situation, and so obviously, as institutions look to see which students will be coming back, which students are looking to compete while enrolled less than full time, they'll be able to look to the blanket waiver, they'll be able to look to the FAQ, and if it doesn't quite match up with what they need, obviously you'll be able to request individual relief for your student athletes. And then the last thing I want to at least cover before we get to the conclusion of the webinar is as of today, as of the conclusion of our April council meetings, the governance proposals that we are anticipating at the 2022 convention, which will be in Indianapolis, hopefully in person, is one, President's Council is sponsoring emergency legislation. I think most of you know that when we need to act in between cycles, in between conventions, we do it through non-controversial. Doesn't mean that the action's non-controversial, but that's our method, that's our process for acting in between conventions. The emergency legislation would give the authority to President's Council as long as 3/4 of the President's Council that were present and have voting rights approved it to act if there was something that they needed to respond to or comply with a court order. So the membership will have an opportunity to vote on that. You've seen a few releases. We will also have legislation around the ability to have virtual athletics recruiting presentations for multiple prospective student athletes. Also, we heard from competitive safeguards asking all 3 divisions to eliminate the option for students to sign a written release to not have to decline the sickle cell solubility test. And the reason behind that is over the last 7 or 8 years since this has been introduced, the administration of the test has gotten easier, the availability of the test has gotten easier, and really competitive safeguards said, having that information, having that test can save lives. And right now they believe that there's a greater reason to waive it than to maintain it. And then the last one, we heard from the Committee on Women's Athletics for all 3 divisions to consider stunt as an emerging sport for women. Our Division III Management Council has moved that forward for convention legislation. And again, as you know, we may have a few more proposals as we come out of our summer meetings. And then our AMA staff always does a terrific job of sort of detailing exactly what the proposal means. So you have all the information you need to be able to vote for your what's best for your institution. This PowerPoint is right on the Division III webinar page. It usually takes us a couple days to put the recording together, but then we'll put a link to the recording. And Allie and I know how busy it is on campus. We thank you for your time. We thank you for your participation. And as we always end our monthly update video, I'll say go Division III and continue to remain healthy and safe. Thanks so much for tuning in.